Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to the Erudition Network's interactive Black History and Knowledge session. I'm sorry I'm a little late tonight. I was actually not going to do a show tonight. I really contemplated it. I have a lot of things that are going on, but I decided I wasn't on last week, and I wanted to make sure I don't really like missing episodes. Excuse me, episodes. So I made sure I got on quickly, did everything to try to jump on tonight. To open up the door for our discussion and for our interactive Black history. If you are new to this program, let me tell you what this is about. The Erudition Network is dedicated to teaching Black history and knowledge. And what I do every Thursday is I come on and I do an hour of interactive discussion with you and everyone to talk about Black history. Sorry, we were getting a error or something was popping up on my. There it is. All right, sorry about that. Saw an error. Want to make sure that it wasn't going to cut us off here. But anyway, what we do here is we try to discuss Black history within an hour and make it very, very interactive with you, so that you are able to walk with it through a sorry. So much was popping up on my computer because it just restarted. But basically what we do here is try to create an interactive conversation with you as we learn about Black history, which is often a history that is either not shared accurately, completely, or has been redacted or revisioned. And so I come on here during Thursday evenings to discuss that. I will say, we don't seem to have anybody here with us right now. Depending on what we get tonight, maybe this will be an hour session, maybe it will not be as much of an hour session. But I will try to stay here for an hour. If we start getting people to come on and interact and to talk and to join in the conversation. If not, I'm fine with it being a shorter session today in order to get this done. So no worries with that. Let me say this. Today is my one of my younger sister's birthdays. My sister Tasha, is her birthday today, and I want to extend a happy birthday to her. I love all of my sisters. I love all my siblings, and I just, every year is a blessing, depending, especially as you get older, with all the things that are going on in the world and everything that is happening. It is such a blessing to have your sibling here to enjoy another birthday, another day above ground is always a blessing. So I just want to extend a happy birthday to her, even if she doesn't watch this, because we don't know if she does, but I just want to make sure that I extended that tonight. Well, let me get into something here. So it's a lot going on, right? We got a lot going on. We've just come out of this political season, and one of the reasons why I had to take a little bit of a break, because it was getting to a point that it was just overwhelming. Months and months of this nonstop politicking and incorrect and information being put out all the time that really isn't accurate, really wasn't correct. It was getting on my nerve. So I wanted to make sure I gave myself some time to just pull away. We do this podcast to teach history, and I've tried my best over the last few years to steam away somewhat from politics and to try to keep everything accurate. There are a lot of people who would like me to talk about a lot of different things, and I usually answer those questions as factually and truthfully as I can. But I really try to not make this, because I don't see politics as something that should destroy people's relationships, friendships, and things of that sort. But what I have been seeing is that's exactly what it has done, especially during this last particular political season. People were choosing sides in churches and social groups and online and everywhere, and it became sectarian to such a point that you are starting to see people turn away from folks who they've been friends with for years. And I've had to warn some folks, like, listen, don't lose a friendship over something as silly as this. It's not worth that. It's not worth that. But you have people who, I guess, they have put so much stake into it that that's what they've decided to do. But that is not what I want to do. I The other thing about this program is every week when we come on, I try to open up the program um, with your questions. Um, I want you to be as interactive as possible um, in these discussions. So, as always, and as we always do, I'm going to open this up to you, the few we have on, to ask any questions or any things that you may feel that you would like to know about history, Black history. Let's understand when I say Black history, because I always want to make this clear too. Black history is world history. It is American history. It is European history. The problem is we don't share it in the way that we should. The problem is we don't value it in the way that we should. And a lot of times we blow off historical facts because for the last 1,000 years or so, it has not been beneficial to certain societies to talk about the activities or the contributions of Blacks, whether that be African Americans, whether that be traditional Africans, whether it be anyone in the African diaspora. It is not beneficial for them to go into that. So they have made it a point to ignore it. And so I open up the door every week, or open up the floor every week, I should say, for you all to ask questions and to delve into this history any way that you see fit. So right now is your opportunity to ask any question that you have, or just let us know that you're here. It's fine with me. And we can do it that way. I'm trying to click over. I can't click over right now. I don't know what's going on with my computer. It's been acting a little weird today. Hold on. I'm trying to get over here so I can click, but it's kind of moving kind of slow for me to see you all's questions. So, all right. Eddie, I see you have a question in here. A friend of mine. Oh, I'll extend a question from a friend of mine. Could one argue that Sykes-Picot agreement? I think you asked me this last week or the week before when I was on, and I think I answered it. I think I answered it, but we can go into it again. In 1960, helped create the Balfour Declaration of 1917. So, if you don't know what the Sykes-Picot Agreement was, it was a treaty signed in 1916 between the United Kingdom and France, right? To partition the Ottoman Empire's territories in the Middle East. It was named primarily for the people who basically signed it. And so I get why it's an important thing. Teddy, can I get a further explanation here why your friend wanted to what this was in relation to, so I know what avenue to go down with this? Or if you don't know, that's fine too. Because there's a lot of ways to go with this, and I want to make sure I'm going the right way and answering the question um, correctly. But it does come down to um, the idea. Did you answer me? Sorry, it's kind of moving slow. But while you're doing that, let me further explain. So what it was again, we're talking about how in the early 1900s, countries started to section off the idea of parts of Africa, and we call it the Middle East now, but Africa and the Middle East were basically the same thing, right? But the Sykes-Picot agreement allowed Britain to control Iraq and the Persian Gulf. It it is also what led to the issue with Palestine falling under certain controls and administrations that we would later find with the Zionists that would take over and remove the Palestinians out of their homes. Um, but it was basically a way to divvy up, right, these sections of the world um, after World War One. Um, and so I was wondering if that's what your friend was kind of talking about. Were they trying to figure out if this is what led to the Palestinian Jewish issue that would later take place? But I will tell you that um, historians will tell you that it is not directly related um, to these things, but in many ways it is, because the Balfour Declaration is what established Jewish homeland in Palestine. And so when you look at what is going on with the world right now, um, and realizing that this happened more than 100 years ago, and that agreements were made by countries who did not even really have people in these, this was land grab, right? Um, there were promises that were made, there were things that were made, and in the end of the day, what it really did is it harmed the Palestinians. It put the Palestinians out of their homeland and having a claim to who they to where they are from, and giving more authority to Zionists. So in answering your friend's question, he said he was intrigued at how the story of the Jews evolved. Yes, and so okay, so that's why I am handling it the way I was, because I thought I talked about it the week before, but basically what it is the way in which the Sykes-Picot agreement came into place is that it influenced a lot of things. It allowed that agreement allowed and pushed out Arabs, pushed out Palestinians. Um, there were promises that were made that were never met. And it was an agreement by multiple countries um, to separate this Ottoman Empire in a way where they could control certain parts of it, and in turn, push certain people out. And eventually, that is exactly what happened. And this is why, when you look at the Balfour Declaration that established the Jewish homeland, it is directly, even though people will say, you will hear historians say that it is not, it is directly related to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? Because one would not have occurred or been able to occur without the other, right? The Allies decided that they were going to separate these lands, and this was the strategy, right? And so, though the Balfour Declaration brought in the Zionists and aligned the Jewish support that was around the world in Europe also, because you had European Jews, and it aligned them to this cause. Now, what also happens is that they went back to a lot of these treaties after World War II, where you could now use these treaties to basically baseline your ownership of Palestine. So it is a great subject to bring up. That's a really great question. It has a lot of different levels to it, but I hope that I answered it in a way, best way for you that I could in response to whatever your friend wanted to know about it. But yeah, it's something to look into, especially as we're looking at what is going on in the world today. And I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but just the historical nature of it, what we're looking at today, it is very, very important that we look at that. Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? That was a good question, Eddie. I appreciate that. I guess there are no questions. Let me ask you all a question, since no one is asking a question. What do you know about the Gilded Age? Can anyone tell me what they know of the Gilded Age? What was the Gilded Age? And do you know when it was? Anybody? Gilded Age. I'll give you about another 30 seconds and then I'll answer it for you. But I want to talk about the Gilded Age because in relation to where we are today, I think it's something that we should discuss. So I'm going to give you guys Gilded Age. Anybody? Well, okay. If you don't know, the Gilded Age was a time, it happened arguably between the mid 1870s, 1875 to roughly around 1905. Some would argue 1910. But it is a time in which corporations and large businesses and trust and people who had a lot of money and a lot of capital were ushering in what the Gilded Age became the age of big business all over the world, not just here in America, but all over the world. The Native Americans were being forced out of their homes and out of their land and out of their property. So large amounts of property were being taken. Things were being done to remove Reconstruction laws and things that had been in place to help African Americans. And they were being pushed out and left behind because of the compromises that were being made. There were inventions that were coming up, and there was a huge era of technological, financial, and just growth overall of business. Cities grew, places like New York, places like Chicago, big cities, right? And yes, you're right, Teddy. It was a time of rich industrialization. That is what you were taught. But here is the thing. The Gilded Age is important in history because I see us right now falling into traps that we faced during the Gilded Age. And I was sitting here thinking the other day about some of the things that happened during the Gilded Age. There was a fight for suffrage, for women's rights. We just saw this again, I'm going back to politics, but we just saw this in this last election where women were fighting for their reproduction rights and things like that. But the Gilded Age was important because during that time, there were a lot of people, common people, fighting against government and business in a way that we had never seen before. And it aligns to where we are right now. And even though we had, people are all talking about economic expansion and who we wanted to vote for so that we could have better business and things like that. Here's the thing. Without the Gilded Age, as we were coming into this era of industrialization and urbanization and things like that, it brought in a lot of changes in law that were oppressive. It could be argued that without the Gilded Age, right? Without this Gilded Age, maybe we would not have had the wars, the world wars that we had. Because see, as man advances, as man grows, as man created transcontinental railroads, as he had created, you had Edison with the light bulb, and you had steel production with Carnegie. You had all of these things going on, and early skyscrapers being made, and new ways of travel, and everything was booming. Money, greed, pushed man to the idea of wanting what someone else had. And also at that time, there was a social and economic delta, a divide. Whereas we're seeing it again now, right? Where the rich were very, very, very rich, and the poor were very, very poor. And around 1880 to 1890, 92% of American families during the Gilded Age lived below the poverty line. They were struggling. You see the old pictures of the tenement buildings in New York and the yards in Chicago and all throughout the country where people were barely making it, while being like Rockefeller, Carnegie, right, were extremely rich. And the rich engaged in this idea of control, where they not only wanted to control the lives of the people, but they wanted to control the government. They wanted to control the country. And so when we look at that, I'm sorry, I didn't see you guys' comments. It was a lot of economic corruption. Yes, there was a lot during the Gilded Age. Tina, I dislike people try to normalize undesirable behaviors, events, or as the system is cyclical, as a cycle which is expected to continue despite being undesirable. Well, here's the thing. History is cyclical, especially when you ignore it or you don't know about it. It becomes cyclical and you repeat it. You repeat it. In 1881, when Booker T. Washington established Tuskegee, he established Tuskegee because he disagreed with the idea of blacks becoming intellectuals, which was something that W.B. Du Bois believed. He believed that blacks should try to learn a vocational task, something that would allow them to work in the Gilded Age as a worker, and then thus allowing them to at least show their worth as a worker, not a slave, but as an actual contributor to the American economy. But at the same time, with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, and with the election of James Garfield, who was later basically assassinated and then killed by his doctor, you saw that the presidential support was gone. Now, I've heard many of us over this last couple of months talk about how presidents don't really affect you. Well, they did affect us. They affected us a lot. When Chester A. Arthur became president after Garfield was shot and assassinated, lingered, and then died, Chester A. Arthur was an incompetent president, but he was also a president who really didn't have any desire to help further Reconstruction efforts, the further growth of African Americans. His idea was still to expand west and remove the natives out of their land, to industrially enslave blacks in the South, where they were still picking cotton, sugarcane, and all of these other things. There was nothing that was put in to stop that. And then Booker T. Washington came and said, this is all happening in 1881, came and said, you know what? Let's just be workers. Let's work for them so that they would later appreciate us. And everybody was poorer and poorer during the Gilded Age, except for the rich, who took from the poor, from their work, their lives, because every time you go to a job in an industrial mill without the safety regulations and everything that came through the populist movement later on, people were dying. Kids were working because there was no law saying that kids were to go to school. So you had child labor. When you read books that were written during the Gilded Age, Mark Twain, who basically named the Gilded Age, wrote Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn around those times. And especially Huckleberry Finn talks about this idea of slavery, this idea of how we look at people differently. And Twain was one of the people who made a point to say that the rich were more savage than the poor. They cared not about widespread poverty. And if anything, they wanted to control not only the people, but the political landscape. When you look at Tammany Hall, when you look at the banks, when you look now, let's look at the banks. J.P. Morgan, which is still a bank, with their name on it, Morgan Trust, all this is still named after the Morgans, made millions, if not billions, on slavery during the years of slavery. They insured slaves as you would insure your car, as people back then insured their horses. This is why it was not a very good thing for someone to kill your slave during slavery, because that was an insurance issue. Lives were protected not because they were the value, the moral value of life, but because of the economic value of the life. If a man killed your slave, he owed you money. Just as if he damaged your car, killed your horse. And so people were very hesitant to necessarily kill a slave. And the young slaves were insured from time of birth, of walking, because they were potential workers, what we could do with them. Slaves were even insured because of the value of their bodies that were then donated to medical science, to hospitals and places like that, so that the insurance could be signed off. I can make money off the death of this slave. But let's get back to the Morgans. They wanted to control the political landscape in the Gilded Age also. Rich people. And I want you to, without me talking politics, I want you to align with what we are right now. You had rich men who went to the government and told presidents and told senators and told congressmen, right? Sign these laws, sign these things to allow me to go and take over the railroads, go and be able to put phones and things into people's homes and lights and all of these things. Standard Oil, Ford, who came up with the automobile. All of these things were happening, and they had to have political backing. On our side of it, the African American side of it, we were being told to work in it. Keep your head down and work in it. When people came over and were too successful, as happened in 1882, the Chinese were more successful because they were coming together as a group and working very hard, especially on the West Coast. What did they pass? The Chinese Exclusion Act. If you go check your history, that banned Chinese people, my immigrants, from coming over here for 10 years because they said that they were corrupt, they were evil, they were gang, and this and this and that, and all this other stuff. Watch the show Warrior that is on, and you will see around that time how this was acting and how they had to come together in these so-called gangs in order to protect themselves from the Irish, from the real Americans who were trying to kill them. And when they couldn't kill them, when they could not outwork them, they barred them out of the country. We are seeing a repeat of history. We are seeing a repeat of history, and we need to be aware of it. Do you think that racism is a social construct created to mask issues like classism? No, I believe racism, classism, sexism, ageism, all of them, are they social constructs? Yes, by definition. But are they something that that has been conditioned in us? That is probably the better question. We have been conditioned to accept these isms, right? And told that these isms help us to better ourselves. We're told that sexism, which is why during the Gilded Age, when we saw suffragists, right? Women were fighting just for the right to vote, and the denial of the right to vote and to own property and to be a person of your own, void of having a husband, was a huge thing. And when we look at people like Alice Paul and Susan B. Anthony, when we look at the fact that they were willing, a lot of these women were willing to be militant, to go into bars, go into places, because the temperance and the suffragist movement ran together. Temperance meaning we are not going to be drinking, we're not going to allow our men to be drunkards. But the idea was that women were stepping out of their place. And it became more violent when with these movements, these isms, as we were talking about, it became more violent because people saw it as a change of their status quo. Sounds familiar to where we are right now. And they were willing to abuse these women, sometimes kill some of these women. And this was not just in America, all over the world. There had women who went on hunger strikes, who were being force-fed, who were being molested, raped, assaulted, simply because they wanted the right to vote and a right to be seen as an autonomous person. But in the Gilded Era, between the 1870s and the early 1900s, where the men of the time, who were the richest, most powerful, they weren't willing to give up these rights. Why would I? When I have whole factories of women, children, and uneducated men working to build my skyscrapers, my steel, to create my petroleum, my oil. And then I'm going to tell them, or to go and dig and get my coal out of the ground, even though hundreds of thousands of them were dying during collapses, and their money was being controlled in a monopoly system. The coal workers, who still are multi-generation people, still are coal workers, right? Who were making money, and the only way they could own their homes, the homes were owned, the stores that were in their area, everything was owned by the coal company. And people were willing to give up these freedoms. their freedom, their ability to vote, their autonomous desire to be a person, just so they could feed their families, just so they could survive financially. I told you all, good to see you, Pastor Reyes. I see you here. Thank you so much. Oh, it's good to be late. I was a little late today, too. When we look at the Weimar Republic, I said this a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, when Hitler took over, when the Nazis took over, they didn't have a very large amount of the vote. Not at all. The Nazis were a very small party compared to the other parties and things that were in Germany at the time. But what Hitler did is he went on a campaign talking about poverty, talking about how people had lost, how Germany wasn't the country that it used to be, how we wanted to make Germany great again. And initially they went in trying to do it violently. Hitler went to jail. Other Nazis went to jail. And here's the thing, when he went to trial, right, his trial was publicized, and he said these things that resounded with the people who were struggling, the poor. And they said, you know what? He's right. I remember when inflation wasn't so large. I remember when we could do this and we could do that. And they all started to go to his side. And politically, he came in as chancellor. And he started to change the laws in the Weimar Republic. And over time, he made he removed more and more rights of the people. He created new laws that took out those who were older, ill, born with birth defects. And nobody cared because, wait a minute, these people are hindering us anyway. Then he went after politicians, and then he went after people, the Jews. But we only remember the Holocaust. We don't remember that this was a step-by-step process that happened, and how the Germans gave up their freedoms to live a better life. So that by the time Hitler took over, coming into the early 1900s, from 1920 up into the 30s, they were living a good life. So I don't care that he's waging war. I don't care that he's taken the shop of my Jewish neighbor who was friends with my family for 2 generations. I don't care, because in the end of the day, I'm better. I'm better. My family can eat. My family only needs to fly a Nazi flag. My family only needs to co-sign to the Nazi idea, whatever they're saying, in order for us to live better. And we don't care if what happened to our neighbors during the nights of broken glass. We don't care if they pull people out and shot them in the street. Why do we care? That's not us. When they moved out of those better homes, we moved in. When he lost his business, I took it. And Black people in America should remember this, because the same thing happened here. It is the reason why when FDR complained about the treatment of the Jewish people in Germany, Germany sent back one response, one word: Mississippi. That's historical. That's a fact. Goebbels sent back one response: Mississippi. In other words, how do you criticize what we're doing when we see what you're doing? We saw how you took your Western frontier and you parceled out land and you populated land and you pushed the Native Americans out of their land. We saw how you have rewritten your laws and done things after Reconstruction to push African Americans, former slaves, out of their homes, out of their land, and push them to be a lower tier people. We see how you treat the immigrants, even the Jews, even over in your country. So who are you to say what we should and should not do? This is why he felt empowered to do it. This is why other governments during that time, who later fell under the thrall of the Nazis, they allowed this to grow. They allowed it to grow. Mike, crazy how that sounds very similar to a lot of things going on today. Not saying that Trump is Hitler, but here's the thing. Do you think that those people thought Hitler was going to be as bad as he was? No, because National Socialism promised a better life for people. When Hitler died at the end of World War II, when he killed himself, it is the reason why Joseph Goebbels' wife went and killed all of their children in the bunker with Hitler. Poisoned all of her children. I think she had 7 or 8 children, and 2 who were adults and weren't there. But she killed all of her children because she couldn't rationalize a world where her children would grow up without National Socialism. People believe these things to death. And then her and her husband went and killed themselves. People believe these things. And we have to be smarter and understand that history can be cyclical. It doesn't have to be exact. I'm not saying that someone has to be another Hitler. But what I am going to say is that if we're not careful, we will find ourselves repeating things. When we look at the compromise of 1877, where they gave the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes, they gave the presidency to this man with the idea of, you could be president if you remove federal and state troops out of the South and stop the federal regulation that had been put in place by Ulysses S. Grant to guarantee the fair treatment and right to vote of blacks, of former slaves. In 1877, going into the Gilded Age, they removed those protections. This was a compromise for a man to be president. So when we say that presidency doesn't have anything to do with policy, with what happens to us, that's not factual. We had riots, Chinese people being killed in San Francisco, having to come together. The Nez Perce issues of Chief Joseph, right? And them having to chase these people, these indigenous people. We don't realize that laws are more powerful than mobs. And laws that are dictated by the rich and the affluent because they can gain from it are very dangerous. Are very dangerous. And yet we turn our attention to the wrong things. This is why I started to think about the Gilded Age. While I started to understand coming out of the Nadir, what we call Reconstruction, into the Gilded Age, and realize how dangerous it is and how closely we are to repeating these things. We're going back down these paths of struggle, and many of us are not even aware. We're not even aware. Rockefeller preyed on people with Standard Oil. He removed people from being able to compete with him. This is why the monopoly laws later came into place. And he had people working for him. And it wasn't until we had a president and Theodore Roosevelt who decided that this is probably not good for for America in its whole, not blacks. Let me clarify that, but America in its whole. Right? So when we talk about these isms, it is and how we get to these things, it's usually by policy. I don't know, but what I will say is that we're focused on the wrong things. Within a 10-year period between 1875 until probably around 1885, when you look at the policies and the things that came along after Reconstruction and the change that it made in this country that later led to world wars, led to Jim Crow, right? Or what about the Dawes Severalty Act? Does anybody know what the Dawes Severalty Act is? Does that strike a bell with anybody? I'll give you about 30 more seconds and I'll answer for you. Because I know it's not something that we typically teach in school. The Dawes Severalty Act came apart to deny the indigenous people their land, to deny any agreements and everything that had been established before that. But it was even more nefarious because what it also did is it made it legal for you to take indigenous people's children and cause what is called forced assimilation or indoctrination and teach them to not speak their language, to not act like their people. It was a mental conditioning to make them lose who they were. And it was made to be legal. It was a law that was passed that made it legal to do this. So while we're focused on these other things, I brought up the Gilded Age today because I want you to understand, right, how quickly you can fall. You can fall. And no, there were people who were fighting during that time, who were trying to change the system and trying to do different things to make it illegal. It's a fight. Well, most of the country is uneducated. When the progressives came in and they decided that these kids should go to school and these kids should get an education, this was for a reason. We had people in this country who did not know basic arithmetic, did not know how to read, but were being put into mines and put into places, into industrial plants, and to work and to work and to work. And people act like this was so long ago. This is not that long ago. So as we look at our world right now, and we see the changes that are going on, I want you to start making your focus to, man, how did this happen in the past? Go and start reading about the Gilded Age. Don't just see it as a time of corruption. Go pick up books. Go look at some things, and you don't have to do a deep dive into it. But definitely, do some look into it to see how we're aligning to that. Because I think if you do that, you will have a better understanding of kind of what we need to be looking out for. And I'm not talking about a party or sectarian beliefs of whatever. I'm talking about you as a person with a God-given discernment, reading and understanding what God has delivered us from in the past and how and what was done to fight against these things. Because I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of people who don't know and don't remember. They see the Gilded Age as some TV show, or, oh, I remember this was during this time, or I remember a little bit from school. But we got to be better than that. We need to understand the Reconstruction, the Gilded Age, and the Progressive Era that led up to World War I, World War II, Nazism, the Nakba, the removal of the Palestinians out of their homeland, murderous regimes all over the world, the separation of Africa onto different countries, and the Middle East, as we call it now. We need to know that. We need to educate ourselves on this so that we have a better understanding of why we are where we are right now. Lastly, I'm going to talk about something, and I feel like it's going to be a little bit more political than I want, but I'm going to bring it up. McKinley. If you all remember McKinley, President McKinley, there was a thing called the McKinley Tariff. The McKinley Tariff. The McKinley Tariff raised imports, and it was the idea that it would strengthen U.S. business. And you hear about tariffs in the media and the news now, and with the president-elect talking about tariffs. But what we don't remember is that when McKinley did the tariff in 1890, we had the Panic of 1893. If you don't know what the Panic of 1893, it was the start of a 4-year period of financial instability in the country. It was also one of the reasons why a lot of people started to lynch, murder, and kill in this country because they did not have. And all of this happened during the Gilded Age. I'm running out of time. Got about 5 minutes before I'm supposed to be out of here, but I think I wanted to just really talk to you all tonight. I think the problem is the farther in time that we get from any horrendous act, the less horrendous it becomes because it gets replaced in our memory with current obstacles. Hitler couldn't have done what he did any earlier than the 1940s because by then the last horrendous acts had faded someone into memory. Exactly. That is completely true, Pastor Razor, because here's the thing. There had been horrendous acts that were done, right? There had been horrible things that have been done all over the world. And yet, we deny them. And this is why I always say, it is so important to us that we learn our history. I didn't say you got to be an expert in history, but you need to learn your history. Because when you learn your history, this is what it does. It informs you. It informs you to God gave that to you to start to look out for things, to start to see things in a way that you wouldn't have seen them before. Right? To go, wait a minute, that don't sound right. That don't sound right. Wait a minute, didn't this happen before? Wasn't it a similar situation? Wasn't it another age of an atrocity or something? And a lot of times we don't do that. We don't do that. We get outside of these different eras. We don't see the industrial the issues of the Industrial Revolution, right? We don't see what pushed us to these different areas, the issues that we were having in Europe and the issues that we were having in America. We don't see any of those things because we have told ourselves they're no longer important. That happened in the past. People weren't as educated, but we're not educating ourselves. We're not educating ourselves. So I will say we definitely are focusing on the wrong things. We definitely can do better. I hope tonight, I just wanted to touch on the Gilded Age a little bit, but I hope tonight that you got something from this. And I want you to go out and start trying to read some of this stuff. Start trying to dig a little deeper. Dig a little deeper. Right? There are so many historians, black, white, and whatever. So, now, there is an issue sometimes with credibility. But here's the thing. If you read something from a person who lived during those times and you learn something from them, and then you read something from someone else that lived in those times, and you kind of coalesce those things and say, okay, they both had these experiences. This is what was going on. This is validated. We need to do that. We need to do that. I hope you all got something today. I wasn't going to do a show tonight. I've been so busy, and I have so many things going on. And but I decided tonight I definitely would get on and do a program tonight, and I'm glad that I did. And you all joined us tonight. Those of you all who did, and I appreciate you. And you guys keep us up in your prayer, up in your thoughts. As we go forward, freaking paper here. As we go forward with this program, as we go forward with Erudition, and as we do what we're doing, I just want you guys to keep us in your prayers, keep us in your mind. Tina will be on Mondays, God willing, and I'm on Thursdays. We don't know when the boys will bring their show back, but definitely join us weekly. If we're not going to be here, I definitely will put something out early and let you know that we're not going to be on that night particularly. But I always try to be on and to provide some information to you all and have this interactive conversation, because I believe it is so important, especially where we are right now and what we're dealing with within the world today. So, but I'm doing a lot, and there's a lot going on, but God give me the strength. I'm sure we can be here every Thursday and we can do what we're going to do. All right. I'm going to let you guys get out of here. I thank you again. You all be blessed. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you see my sister, if you're in Chicago or you know her, send her a message on Facebook telling her happy birthday. Today is her birthday for Natasha, for my sister Natasha. And definitely keep us in your prayers as we go further with this Erudition Network and what we're trying to do here. But until next week and until next time, God willing, you all be blessed. And I thank you for joining us. Have a good one.